I listened to a podcast episode recently with Cal Newport. He's the deep work guy, and he's got a podcast called Deep Questions with Cal Newport. And he went through 8 books that he really liked about kind of his core space, time management, efficiency, getting things done. And he went through 8 and kind of pulled out the big idea from every one. And I thought, well, that'd be pretty interesting, because a lot of the most successful people that I know are readers. They read a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I'm old. My ears always perk up when I hear, hey, here's some books that I would recommend from people that have had a lot of success. Sure. And that, like, I care what they think are good and meaningful. And so I made a list of 5 books that I read in 2023 that I would like to recommend to our audience.
Great. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
What are you teaching me today?
Well, more so than teaching, I listened to a podcast episode recently with Cal Newport, who I've mentioned before.
Yeah.
He's the deep work guy, and he's got a podcast called
We should get him on this
Deep
podcast.
Questions. That'd be quite the coup.
Yeah, let's do it. We can coup. I want to coup up in 2024.
All right, let's coup up.
Like, let's coup up. All we got to do is, ask. I've been listening to a lot of, sorry to interrupt you. I've been listening to a lot of, producing podcasts. Podcasts. or
that's a little meta.
Or content.
Yeah.
About, getting big name guests or people, big names that would be a big name to you or to me or whatever. Just ask. They'll do it. Especially if they've got something they want to promote or sell. So, if he's got a new book coming out this year, that'd be prime time to ask him.
Yeah.
But we should ask anyway. Anyway, sidebar. But, yeah.
Well, I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
We should shoot bigger.
Yeah, we should shoot big. Yeah.
So, listening to Deep Questions, I think is the name of his podcast, Deep Questions with Cal Newport. One of his first books, I don't know if it was his first book, was Deep Work. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of famous for deep work. He's written a number of other bestsellers, and he went through, I think it was 8 books that he really liked about kind of his core space, time management, efficiency, deep work, books in that space, getting things done. And he went through 8 and kind of pulled out the big idea from every one. Didn't give you an outline of the whole book, but here's one big idea from the book. And I thought, well, that'd be pretty interesting, because a lot of the most successful people that I know are readers. They read a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I'm old. My ears always perk up when I hear, hey, here's some books that I would recommend from people that have had a lot of success. Sure. And that, I care what they think are good and meaningful. And so I made a list of 5 books that I read in 2023 that I would like to recommend to our audience.
Great.
They're not specific to commercial real estate, but they're all applicable to business and success and things like this. Now, I will say this. I didn't used to be a reader at all until I was in the Marine Corps. It was before I was married. And I was stationed in Monterey, California. I was at the language school out there. And one of my buddies was getting married in Bakersfield, California. Mm-hmm. And so we piled into, a bunch of us jumped into a handful of vehicles. I didn't have a car out there. And we drove to Bakersfield. And it was hours. I don't remember how many hours. But I remember falling asleep. Mm-hmm. Like I generally do if I'm riding in a vehicle. If I'm not mentally engaged in something, I'll fall asleep. Mm-hmm. So I remember waking up in the backseat of this car. I think it was Bailey's little car. But on the seat next to me was a Tom Clancy book called Rainbow Six. Mm. And, it's a military thriller. And I looked out the window and I looked around, and we're in essentially the desert of California.
Yeah.
Now, California is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
On the coasts. Mm-hmm. But you start going inland a little bit, and it gets really hot, and it's brown, and it's not pretty, and it's desert. And so I looked around, and I was like, man, there's nothing even to look at that's interesting out here. So I grabbed that book, and I started reading, and it hooked me in the first 5 minutes, and I couldn't put it down. And over the next number of months, I bought every Tom Clancy book.
Wow.
from The Hunt to Red October through, and he's got this character, Jack Ryan, in this book, in this series of books. They're all about him. There's one off here or there that's about a different character that's still in that universe.
Yeah.
But I was like, the books were incredible. They're very accurate when it touches Marine Corps or military and tactics and geopolitical stuff and spies and all that stuff. I was like, super interesting. They're thrillers, suspenseful. I was like, I read every book that he'd written over the coming months. And I just kind of fell in love with the intellectual stimulation of reading great books. Mm-hmm. And then when I got out of the military and I got into the business world, I started reading business books. And I kind of stopped reading fiction. Mm-hmm. And, my wife is kind of known as one of these people that'll read 100, 120 books in a year kind of thing. And I never really got to that level. But then when my 3 years at the Massimo Group, we would read business books like crazy because we were always looking for great ideas that we could take from other industries and apply to commercial real estate to serve our members. Mm-hmm. And so I got to the point where I was only reading business stuff and, maybe 20, 30 books a year, most of it on Audible. I almost exclusively read books by listening to them on Audible at this point. And I remember at some point, it's like I hit a ceiling of just too much information, too much content in my head. Mm-hmm. It's like I had nowhere else to put any of it. And so I just kind of stopped reading for a time. Mm-hmm. That's probably when I really started getting into podcasts. And then I was like, you know what? I really enjoyed those Clancy books. And he'd passed away. But there's other authors that have picked up that Jack Ryan universe. Oh, really? And they continue to write like 1 or 2, maybe 3 books in that universe a year.
Yeah. Wow.
It's like, I'm going to start reading fiction again. And so I'd read a couple David Baldacci books and a couple, who's the other, just prolific kind of thriller writer. I forget, the name escapes me. Grisham. Yeah. John Grisham. Yeah. I'd read some of those, and you'd seen the movies with Tom Cruise and, Denzel Washington and some of those. And so I just started reading fiction again, and it's like it allowed my brain to relax and enjoy. Yeah. As opposed to trying to learn something that I could repackage and provide as something of value in a different context or whatever. And so, I went through all the books I read in 2023. They're like 90% fiction. Yeah. And I was like, I'm totally okay with that. It's like it allows my brain to relax and just enjoy. Mm-hmm. And it's like a nap for my brain. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of people in business are like, I would never read fiction. It's like a waste of time and whatever. I think that's hogwash, man.
Hogwash.
That's the technical term for that. Hogwash. Where did hogwash come from?
Your 68-year-old brain. Mm-hmm. It's malarkey.
Yeah. But I think reading of any kind is valuable. And I can also tell you that, especially some of these fiction books, there's always conflict. Mm-hmm. They're always solving problems. Mm-hmm. And even just to allow your brain to marinate and how this fiction author has written these characters to solve the problem. Like there's even value in that. Yeah. Just seeing things from different perspectives, and you can utilize that. You might just have an idea on, hey, I bet if we tried this, it might work. And it could come from fiction, you know? So I would encourage people to read. I think it's a wonderful habit. It's enjoyable. It's valuable, whether it's fiction or nonfiction.
It's an antidote to insomnia.
That can be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And here are some, by the way, of my recent favorite fiction authors.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
C.J. Box.
Okay.
Is when I found him in 2023. He writes the Joe Pickett series, and this guy's a game warden in Montana, I think, or Wisconsin, somewhere up there. And there's like 20 or 23 books It's kind of that universe, they
Yeah.
same repeating characters, and he develops characters over time, and you can see the story arcs and all that. Just really, really good. And I love the whole outdoorsy thing, even though I'm not that way.
Yeah.
So I would recommend him. Craig Johnson is another one. Same kind of genre. This is a sheriff, Longmire, and there was a show called Longmire, like 5 or 6 seasons that came from this book. Again, over 20 books in that series. He's a sheriff, and he's the sheriff that you want.
Yeah.
You just like this guy. He's got
Andy
his
Griffith.
demons, and not so much that. A little bit edgier than Andy Griffith.
Yeah.
But that I would recommend. Another is Mark Cameron, and this is one of the authors that has come in to continue the Jack Ryan universe.
Yeah.
He's really good, but he also writes his own universe of characters. So he's got some other books that are series, and I tend to like those.
Yeah.
James Chandler is another one I would recommend, as well as David Baldacci. He writes a book or two a year, and they're all good. So just on the fiction front, if you're looking for some good series that you can just kind of get lost in these characters, and I would recommend those authors. Those are the ones I like, but not the purpose of this episode.
Yeah.
So here is book number 1. I'm actually not finished this book. But it's called A Range.
Now, are you ranking these?
No, these are in no particular order. But of the, nonfiction books that I read this year, I kind of picked the 5 that I really dug.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, we're talking nonfiction.
So these are 5 nonfiction books that I would recommend.
Great.
And the first one is Range, and we'll link all these in the show notes, so you guys can click a link and buy it on Amazon or Audible or however you want to consume it if you want to pick any of these up. Range is, here's the concept, here's the big idea of range. And it's that a great amount of success is possible by not specializing. Now, for years, especially when I was with the Mossimo Group and stuff, we would encourage and coach our clients to specialize in commercial real estate.
Right.
If you're in a small market like this, specialize in your geography, become the absolute expert in Owensboro, Kentucky,
right,
which is what we've kind of done here. If you're in a larger market, be the guy or the woman when it comes to apartments or industrial, like specialize in something so you can be the brain surgeon instead of the general practice doctor.
Right. So much of that is in my industry as well.
Yep.
Like niche, or even like putting out content, or whatever, like niche down.
Yeah.
Niche down. Yeah.
The riches are in the niches.
Right. Master of none, right?
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's so...
So here's the concept of this guy. This is his big idea, all right? He starts off the book by talking about Tiger Woods. Now, you certainly know who Tiger Woods is.
Yeah.
Everybody knows. But you may not know his story, all right? His daddy put a club in his hand pretty much from the womb. And there's videos of him as like a 2 and 3 year old with this perfect swing already. And Tiger Woods never did anything but golf. Mm-hmm. And he succeeded. He's had his troubles, and, he had non-golf stuff kind of derail his career.
Right. But he's good at golf.
But yeah, I mean, like, you could arguably say the best ever.
Yeah.
Right? There is an argument there.
Yeah.
For a period of time, it was like, he's going to break Jack Nicklaus's record on most majors, and, his extracurricular activities kind of derailed that. And he probably won't get there now. But there was a time where it was like, he just needs to play those tournaments. He's going to win them, and he's going to be the best ever and whatever. But like, he specialized from an early age. Well, then he starts telling the story about this other athlete who played soccer and other sports, and it wasn't until he was about 16 that he specialized in his sport.
Michael Jordan?
Nope. And this guy went on to become the best ever.
Michael Phelps?
Roger Federer.
Roger Federer
grew up, he's a tennis player, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And probably most people would know Roger Federer.
Yeah. I know the name, but yeah.
Right. And he broke the record for most majors won in tennis, and I think his record has now been broken.
Yeah.
I don't know so much about tennis, but
yeah.
His story
Who
is
does?
he played all kinds of different sports. His parents didn't really push him. You know, they weren't like Tiger Woods' dad. And when he finally, in his teens, picked the sport he wanted to pursue, it was the range that he had playing all these other sports that led to his success when he finally did pick the one he was going to pursue.
Right. I see that.
It was that all the wealth of experience that he had playing other sports that led to his success in his chosen one.
God, I totally see that. Inner Game of Tennis. That's a book recommendation I have. Anyway, go ahead.
What's it called?
Inner Game of Tennis.
Okay. Is that kind of a like inner game?
It's all about like self one, self two.
Okay.
Right. So how much we get in our way. So it was recommended reading when I was in theater school.
Okay.
But it's a book about tennis, becoming the best tennis player, and how your body knows what to do when you practice, you're watching, and when you're thinking too much, you're going to screw your game. So all about learning to trust self. It's fantastic. But with this guy, Federer, right? All the experience that he's had with everything else, because of that book, I can totally see how, even if it's a different discipline, he probably through all that mastered this idea that he could let go of that part of thinking to really excel in whatever it was he ended up choosing to do.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So this is why this book has really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Is when I was in middle school and high school, I thought I might want to be a pastor. And so...
Same.
Yeah.
Youth pastor.
Yeah, and of course, youth pastor for me at first. You know, I interned with our senior pastor when I was in high school as part of a class. I was also interested in politics. And so a lot of my intellectual energy went into like theology and politics, which don't seem to align at all.
Sure.
Or might even be diametrically opposed sometimes.
Right.
But regardless, there's a lot of intellectual energy and study in those areas. Then I went to college and almost failed out, enlisted in the Marine Corps, and I spent 5 years in the military. So there's this wealth of learning and experience in a military environment. I didn't study business in college. My degree's in organizational communication.
I don't know if I knew that.
Which is not broadcasting. It's the study of communication.
Oh, wow.
The study of the idea of like when I have an idea in my brain and I want to get it into your brain, I want to communicate that idea, I have to choose words to like form that idea in a concrete way that I can send your way.
Right.
And these words that I choose have a dictionary definition. They also have a connotative on like
what does it mean?
The added meaning of based on my experience and the way my family used that word growing up and whatever, all of that. And I have to choose those words and then I send it your way and then you decode it based on your connotative definitions of those words, which means automatically there's going to be a gap.
Right.
And then you translate those words into the meaning. And so to get 100% of the meaning in my head into your head is very difficult. So it's the study of how the whole...
Fascinating.
Yeah. And then you layer on top of that, you know, the cultures of organizations and how they use language specifically to their organization. You throw on top of that intercultural communication based on different cultures and languages and countries and all. So it was the study of all that. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, everything from like, how do you fire somebody well?
Yeah.
That's what I studied in college.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
It's very
Makes sense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I thought. And there were also very few tests, and it was a lot of papers and a lot of talks and speeches you had to give. So it was almost no tests.
Yeah.
You just wrote papers and talked a lot.
I would have loved that.
I was all for that.
Yeah.
So then I go in the military. I have this military experience. I get out. I start working for Dad. in brokerage for about 8 years, and then I go work for a national commercial real estate company for a year. So I see kind of corporate America, and then I left there and went into food safety for 2 years. Complete departure on like more of a startup tech in the food safety industry, just a completely different experience. And then I worked with Rod Santomassimo at the Massimo Group for 3 years, and so to be part of a coaching organization that much leaner, more of a startup, not as much of a startup feel there, but they weren't a startup at that point, but just a smaller company. And then I came back came back to the company, assumed a leadership role, eventually bought that out. And so now I'm leading this organization, but I'm doing it with this wide range of experiences that I've had that are all, I can take lessons from all of that and apply it to what I'm doing now. I've had great bosses. I've had terrible bosses. I've seen good leadership and bad. I've been in all kinds of different contexts. And because of all of that, I've got this wide range of experience that I can draw on to try to be the best leader of this company that I can be. And so that's kind of the concept of this book, and it's really resonated with me. And I
love that.
Yeah,
I'm gonna read that.
The second one I would recommend, and I would say, if you just read one of these, this might be the one I would recommend as the top of these 5. It's called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And it's by Dan Sullivan, who's the strategic coach guy, and Dr. Benjamin Hardy.
Could we get Dan Sullivan? Would he be a good, if we were to get him for the podcast?
That'd be pretty massive.
Yeah. Great. 2024, baby.
Might as well ask him.
I know. Let's manifest some amazing guests.
So 10X is easier to 2X. Here's the big idea of this book.
10X is easier than 2X?
Than 2X.
Yeah.
So 10X is easier than 2X. The idea of 2X is the idea of marginal growth. Okay, so forget about the idea of 10 versus 2. All right, what 2X represents is incremental growth. Okay, so think about it in the context of our brokerage company here. If we're going to incrementally grow, that means we're essentially going to do the same thing, and we're going to try to do it better. And instead of making X amount of dollars, Brad. I should have just taken that call.
I know.
But, so the idea of 2X, of incremental growth, it's like, if we're going to make X amount of money let's say we made X amount of money in 2023, and I want to grow it by 15%, 20%. That means we're going to have to do what we're doing now better to get that extra.
Yeah.
All right. So that might mean doing basically the same things, maybe being a little bit more efficient, maybe working more hours, trying harder.
Yeah.
To get a 15, 20% bump in revenue. Now, I'm all for doing 15, 20% better than we did last year, but like that's going to be harder. And we just have to get better at what we're already doing to get that extra percent. So more hours, working harder, becoming more efficient, blah, blah.
Yeah.
However, if I came into this year and said I wanted to 10X our business, and I wanted to say, take this one, and let's say we want to do 5 or 6 times better. What that requires is transformation.
Yeah.
We can't just work more hours.
Right.
And do 5, 10 times better than we did last year. We can't just get marginally more efficient and have that big of a jump. We have to completely transform as a company to make that jump. And the premise of that book is that transformation is easier than just working harder and more hours to get incremental growth.
Wow.
Like, let's just go ahead and transform.
Right.
To do it. And gives a lot of different examples, talks about Leonardo da Vinci, and actually has a real estate example of somebody who, I think it was a residential example of this woman started selling homes, all right? And then she built a team, all right? She transformed into from the producer to the leader of this team. And she had exponential growth, not incremental growth, going from, a single producer to the leader of a team. Exponential growth. She transformed into that leader.
Yeah.
And then her company tapped her on the shoulder and said, we want you to lead the office. So she transformed into the leader of her team to leader of the office. Again, exponential growth. And then the franchise that she wanted her to build out a region. And so she went from a franchise owner, she transformed into the
regional manager,
like the master franchise.
Sure. Yeah.
For that region. And so instead of building her office, she was building offices. She transformed in that. And every time there was this exponential growth. It's that idea of, I don't want to, let's say I did 10 deals this year. I don't want to do 14 this year.
Right.
I want to, in our case, say we have X amount of agents. I don't want our guys to just do more deals. A 10X might be, let's see how we can grow our talent pool here. So increase producers. Maybe we add offices in other markets. And instead of, doing more deals myself, I'm now leading multiple offices in different regions. And so I need to transform from, producer into leader of a team to, it's that idea of 10Xing is actually, going through that transformation is actually easier than just
trying
the
harder.
Incremental growth of trying harder.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me. And it's kind of this, and this is another strategic coach concept that he talks about in this book, but it's their version of the 80-20 rule. You get 20% of your income you get 80% of your income, or 80% of positive of something comes from just 20% of
the effort,
or 20% of your clients or whatever. And so if that's true, why not just work with that 20%? Cut the others. So either allow others in your office to work with that 80% or send them to your competition. And then just work with people who fall into that 20% category and try to increase those people. And to serve them well, you actually have to transform how good you are at what you do so that you appeal and can serve this higher quality client or whatever. So the book's all about that.
Yeah.
And it was eye-opening. It took a lot of concepts that I'd marginally understood and kind of weaved them together. Let's just do something big and let's transform into what we need to become to accomplish that. That's going to be much more challenging, satisfying, valuable. And we can trim the dead weight along the way and just transform into a much bigger, more valuable version of our company than just trying to be 15 to 20% better every year.
Yeah. Cool.
And so that's kind of the concept of that book. It was really good. Here's one that was maybe the most interesting book of the year.
Okay.
All right. Really got my wheels turning. It's called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. It's by a guy who's a demographer named Peter Zion.
What did you say he was?
He's a demographer. So he studies demographics.
Oh, like a anthropologist in a way?
So a demographer studies, like if I'm going to run demographics on a piece of property, like within a 3-mile radius, the demographics are going to tell me how many people live there, how many are male, how many are female, what's their average age, what's the distribution of incomes, it's going to give me the data on who the people are that live in that geography that I've defined.
Sure.
Those are the demographics. So a demographer would study the data of the people that live in a place.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
What this guy is proposing in his book is that we are facing the end of globalization in the next 20 years, and we're going to go back to regional economies. Right now, we basically have a global economy.
Yeah. And
his premise is the reason we have a global economy is because there's basically safe transportation of goods all throughout the world. And the reason there's safe transportation of goods all throughout the world is because the U.S. Navy has policed shipping lanes ever since the end of World War II. And that's true.
Yeah.
And he's suggesting that that may come to an end, and that when that happens, it's not going to be safe to ship all these goods from China to the United States, and we're going to have breakdowns in the supply chain, and it's going to become very regional. And at the same time, when you look at the demographics, according to him, in specifically China and Russia, they are not replacing their aging and dying. They're not having enough kids to sustain their population, not even close. And when you factor on top of that, like the way Russia is like losing people in the Ukraine, like they're almost losing a significant amount of a whole generation of men. And they're just throwing bodies at the Ukraine. It's basically a stalemate at this point, and just people continue to be killed in that war and stuff. And they're not having enough babies to reproduce or to sustain their population. And he actually says in this book that both China and Russia will cease to be powers in the next 20 years. Like they're going to implode in on themselves because they're going to run out of workers.
Right. Wow.
So it's a very, very interesting book. And then he plays out what happens when we go back to regional economies.
Yeah.
And he basically says the Eastern Hemisphere is going to be brutal. And the Western Hemisphere is going to have some painful changes, but will basically be okay.
Yeah.
Because we have, the United States specifically, we've got the best farmland in the world. We've got the best waterways in the world. We've got, we're defendable,
Yeah.
So it was really, really interesting. Now, he may be so far out there that half the people who read this book are thinking, that's nuts to think about. But he's seems to have compelling evidence, and it's really interesting. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he was on Jordan Harbinger's podcast, and I heard him speak about these things on both of those podcasts, and then I read his book.
Yeah.
And we use demographics extensively in that CI 102 class that I teach for the CCIM Institute. And so anybody that's interesting, that's a demographer that writes a book, like I like reading that stuff.
Yeah, sure.
And there's not many interesting demographers that write books.
What was the reason he gave as to why those safe transportation exporting and
he thinks the United States is losing the desire to police it.
Right.
Thinks we're becoming more isolationist instead of the cops of the world.
Right.
And
I see. Yeah, interesting. Because it seems like if he's right, then Russia and China being superpowers and a threat to America being a superpower, or the threat of war with them on a World War III scale, seems like, well, stop policing the waterways, and that might do the trick. You know what I mean?
Or
yeah,
it could force their hand.
Right.
Like if they see it coming.
Yeah.
If they understand their own demographics and they realize, hey, if the United States does this, it basically seals our doom.
We've got leverage.
And we've got nukes. It might force our hand into, let's go ahead and have this war now and try to save ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of a frightful idea.
Yeah.
But anyway, super interesting book.
Thank God Elon Musk is trying to get us to Mars,
Yeah, right. Elon is going to solve everything. Okay. All right, next one is called 6 Types of Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni. Now, have you read any Patrick Lencioni books?
Mm-mm.
All right. He's very famous in the business space, runs a consulting firm.
Patrick Lencioni.
He writes business fables.
Oh.
So instead of writing a book where he explains his concepts, he writes a story
Nice.
that explains his concepts.
Nice.
And they're interesting and engaging and easy reads. And at the end, he summarizes it all in kind of a, hey, here's the concepts. And he lays it all out. Right? So he's written Death by Meeting. He's written a book called Getting Naked, which, provocative title, but the concept there was give value free up front first.
Yeah.
Like just
Nice.
lay it out there.
Yeah.
And then you'll be much more likely to land the client than if you were to hold back and,
Yeah.
But this one, 6 Types of Working Genius, he tells the story of a startup and a team of people and how good folks work together fairly well, but there are certain things that like trigger the boss man, and he becomes very difficult to deal with. And through a series of events and meetings, they sort of map out the concept of working geniuses. Right. So this kind of reminded me of the work that Cody will do with Type Science, her company, where it's the Myers-Briggs consultation. This is not, working genius is not the idea of personality, but it's the idea that there is kind of a sweet spot in what I do. And he says there's 6 archetypes of working genius, and you generally have 1 or 2 that's your main thing, 1 or 2 that you're competent in, and 1 or 2 where if you're operating in that space, like that's where you get triggered and you might be super grouchy and so it's really interesting to read the fable of how this executive team of a successful company kind of figures this out and retools their roles based on their working geniuses for a much more pleasant working experience and a much more effective growth rate after, because they're all working in their in their areas of working genius. So it's pretty dang interesting. And because he communicates in the concept of a story, like you read it like you read fiction. Yeah. And then you pick up all the concepts, and then at the end he kind of lays them out in a very nonfiction.
Right.
And it's really cool how he writes. And so if you've never read a Patrick Lencioni book, I would recommend you pick up any of them, and he's probably written 10 or 12. And this one in particular was the one I read of his in 2023. It was just really good.
Yeah.
And I read it. I remember reading it or listening to it on Audible on the way down to a softball tournament in Alabama. I listened to the whole book while I was on like a 5-6 hour drive. Because the nice thing about Audible, Lencioni's books are 5-6 hours long, but you can listen to them at like double speed.
Yeah.
And I tend to listen to my books about 1.3, 1.4 speed, depending on how fast the author actually talks.
Sure.
And so you can consume these books faster than you can actually read the books.
Yeah.
Out loud.
Right.
So it's nice. I'm driving. I'm just letting these concepts sort of marinate as I drive through the Alabama countryside. And by the time I was pulling up to the field, like it was like there were 30 minutes left on the book, and I finished it up later on. It's like a great way to do a road trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 5th book recommendation from 2023 is called Lifespan, Why We Age.
Ooh.
And it's by Dr. David Sinclair. And he's got a cool, I think, British accent.
I know this name.
So it makes the audiobook a lot of fun when there's an accent,
Smarter.
I remember.
Smarter.
I remember when I read this book, and he's got a podcast that kind of goes along with it. That's on Audible as well. So you can listen to him and his co-host talk about the chapters.
Oh, nice.
And they're kind of, the audiobook at the end has these interview kind of podcasts kind of built into the book. So he's
cool
talking more about what he communicated in the chapter. But I remember on our family thread, I threw this out as a recommendation for the family, and there was some conversation that may be why you remember it, or you might have heard of this guy. But what he basically says is aging itself is the disease, And all the diseases that we experience have in their, not all of them, but most of what we deal with as we age is because of the disease of aging.
Oh, okay.
And so the book is about the things you can do. One, just understanding how and why we age, and things you can do to increase your lifespan. All right. So he's a big proponent of intermittent fasting, he talks a lot about the amount of comfort that we have has basically turned off in our cells the mechanism of regeneration that pain and stress cause. And so like he suggests that we spend some time being cold. And that's why exercise is so valuable, is because you're reminding your body that it has to rebuild itself. And he talks about, how you can change your diet to re-engage a lot of your body's regenerative innate mechanisms, and the way we live and what we eat and how often we eat and how much we eat and all that stuff has just sort of turned a lot of that off. And so modern medicine has prolonged our life, but the way we live has created a situation where we live longer, but our quality of life at the end is not good. And so this book is about how we can live longer at a much higher quality of life, way longer. So, he sees a future where, it's going to be normal for people to be 100 years old or more, and that here are things you can do now so that when you are 100 years old, you still have a sharp mind and a capable body, and you can enjoy your life. Because I've often thought, like, man, I don't know if I want to be 90 if my mind's half gone and I need help to use the restroom. You know what I mean? Like, what? And that's probably, a stupid younger person thought, but I don't know if I'll feel that way when I'm 85. But that was just a really thought-provoking book. And I remember actually making some changes, what I eat, how I exercise, how I walk the dog. I might not put my jacket on and just experience being cold, because I know it's going to trigger some of these regenerative mechanisms in the cells where they'll actually be able to rebuild themselves. And so it's just really, really interesting. And if, I don't know why you wouldn't be interested in that kind of a longer, healthier, higher quality of life. And I think we were talking about this in one of our other episodes that we talked about recently, and maybe it'll come out after this, but it's the idea of your future self and actually making decisions now for the benefit of your future self, as opposed to the benefit of your present self. And when I was walking into the studio today, Be Your Future Self Now by Dr. Benjamin Hardy. This is a whole book on that concept. And Dr. Benjamin Hardy is the co-author of 10X is Easier Than 2X with Dan Sullivan that we talked about before.
Intentional transformation.
But this is the idea of why wait? A lot of people...
why wait to be your future self? Yeah. Why not make those choices now? As your future? Yeah.
So it's... just interesting.
Yeah, nice.
But those are the 5 book recommendations that I would encourage people if they're interested in kind of at least a big idea out of each of these books. So we have Range, 10X is Easier Than 2X by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Into the World is Just the Beginning by Peter Zion. 6 Types of Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni. And then Lifespan, Why We Age by Dr. David Sinclair.
Grab your copies right now in the comments. They're all linked below, whether you want Audible or get a hard copy. While you're at it, why don't you hit subscribe on that subscribe button. Turn on that little notification bell so you know every time we drop something. We've got an exciting 2024 in store.
Oh, we do?
Yeah. If you're listening to the podcast on one of the Popcast platforms, Podclast?
Popclast?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
If you got a Popcast platform that you're listening to... Plop-class platform. Please leave a review. It'll helps us out a great deal in this world. And share share this if you liked it. And if you didn't like it, share it with somebody, one of your enemies.
That's right.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, man.
Love you, brother.
Love you.
Bye, Alice.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.